We are very fortunate to have as our keynote speaker somebody who is a leader in every sense of the word. John Jones, who is a member of the class of 1972, is a retired chairman and CEO of Air Products and Chemicals, which is located in Allentown. And many of you know the great relationship that Air Products has had with the university for many years. Air Products, but more importantly, John Jones, are known for their integrity, for their commitment to the community. And Villanova has been doubly blessed to have John as one of the great leaders on our Board of Trustees. And on a personal level, John has been a great mentor and advisor to me, and I appreciate the guidance that he has given me and some of the issues that I've asked him for help with over the years. And so it is with great pleasure that I welcome and introduce to you John Jones, who will give the keynote address, Leading Today in a Changing World. John?
Thank you, Paul. It's a real pleasure to be here today to share my thoughts, my experiences on leadership. In a world that is increasingly harsh on anyone who's willing to pick up that mantle called leadership of any kind of organization, whether you're a publicly traded company, private, educational, religious, governmental, all are under pressure. When Paul asked me to speak at this, and Father Peter followed up, I accepted immediately, and the more I thought about it, the more excited I got about what we're doing here today. But before I get into that, let me just talk about some of my feelings, some of my theories, which impact what I believe goes into making a good leader. I believe that change and the ever-increasing pace of change that we're all witnessing puts incredible pressure on our organizations and the people in those organizations. I believe that people, human beings, fundamentally do not like change. It causes discomfort. I believe that change and accelerating change without good leadership can turn that discomfort into fear. I believe that fear left unchecked can cause organizations, good people, to ignore reality, do some really strange things, ultimately cause the demise of their organization, or make them into something that is insignificant compared to their past. And I would ask you just to think about, you pick your time frame, 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, 2,000 years, go on. Roman Empire, British Empire, Ottoman Empire, country, company. A lot of them have managed to go from greatness to destruction because of the lack of good leadership. That's my theory. It's not the people, it's the leadership that just didn't deal with the reality of the time. Now, if you buy what I just said, you have two choices. You can go crawl in a hole, ignore reality. If you do want to do that, I would say think about what I just talked about in terms of all the entities that managed to disappear. Or you can get excited about it and say, hey, this is a real opportunity. It's an opportunity that if I can find leaders, develop leaders, who can get people to not fear change, but to really start thriving on change, you can differentiate yourself. And that's why I was excited about what we're doing here today, because I think it's a real opportunity to talk about that. It's a real opportunity for Villanova. It's a great institution. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for Villanova based on the Augustinian principles. I feel very strongly about this, and you'll hear more of this as I go on. Veritas, unitas, caritas, based on that, differentiating itself even more going forward. Now, a lot of people will, say, are you saying that the DNA of today's leader, or tomorrow's leader for that matter, is all that different from the past? And, companies have failed, others have survived. And in fact, in my own experience, when I graduated as a young chemical engineer, the majority of the companies I interviewed, American Cyanamid, W.R. Grace, Allied Signal, Bethlehem Steel, I can go on and on and on, disappeared. While others, my own company included, a little company when I first went there was $300 million in a cornfield, survive. People will say, well, why get excited about this leadership issue? Things have come and gone. And my words of wisdom to people when I talk to them is stop, think, look around. Look around at what's going on. It's very, very different. Before I get into the leadership qualities, let me just give you what happened to me in coming to a realization that something very different is going on in the world. And it started, my first awakening was in 1997. I was in Thailand visiting our company there. Bangkok at the time had more construction cranes than any other major city in the world. Thailand was flourishing. I was there for a week, so I was out touring all the facilities, meeting with our people. Something strange happened. The cranes shut down in Bangkok. The financial crisis came to be in Bangkok. We did the normal thing. We said, okay, we need to focus on the people here. We need to secure our assets. We need to take care of our customers. We need to take care of our people. I got on my plane, went back to the States, but then something strange started happening over the course of the next few weeks. Thailand's financial crisis went to Mexico, other Latin American countries, Asia, Russia, and everybody sort of just stopped. It's, what is going on? I remember sitting there thinking, all this computer, electronic investment maybe is starting to work. Not necessarily in a good way, but certainly in the financial area, the world is getting interconnected. And immediately started thinking, what do we, our company, we had 20,000 employees in 40 countries. We needed to put systems in place so we can not allow it to happen to us, but that we could actually compete with speed. A couple of years later, on the eve of my becoming CEO, late 1999, some of our employees came to me from our HR group and said, hey, we were just at a meeting. We saw a woman speak there. She was a futurist. Now, I'm an engineer, and I think most of you know that engineers and people who know me, not really a touchy-feely type. So I really didn't initially react well to the concept of a futurist coming in, but they said, look, you're working on your plan for the company. We really think you should have this woman come in and talk to the senior management before you roll your plan out. So I finally caved. I give them credit. They worked me over, and I accepted. So Margaret Regan, McKinsey consultant, lived in 2010, and I'm not kidding. This lady, no matter what you did, you could waterboard her, and she would not come out of 2010, I swear. She comes in, and she starts. The world's going to change. It's going to be very different in 2010. The electronic capability is going to change how things are done. People are going to be able to work in a virtual world. They're going to have, she didn't call them PDAs, but if you recall, back in 1999, our cell phones were actually cell phones, and just about that's it. She started talking about these new gadgets that you're going to be able to do all kinds of things with them. She said, they'll work for you. They probably won't want to be an employee because they're going to want to work for other people too. You won't need large offices, buildings, because they're going to want to work where they're comfortable, like on the beach in Fiji. They're probably not interested in ever meeting you, will have no great need to see you, but don't worry, you will be able to communicate with them because you'll be hooked up in a virtual way with all this electronic gadgetry. So I immediately said, damn it, I knew this. I knew this was a waste of time, cost us money. I went home, and my wife, Denise, we've been married 37 years now. She knows me well. As soon as I walked in the door, I didn't even say anything. She said, what's wrong with you? And I said, you're not going to believe. We had this idiot come in, a futurist, cost all kinds of money. I blew an afternoon. I just can't believe I was dumb enough to accept this. 2 weeks later, my daughter Jacqueline comes home from NYU grad school. Says, Dad, can I borrow your laptop? And I said, well, Jacqueline, I want to point out to you that you happen to be holding your own laptop, so why do you need my laptop? She said, Dad, trust me. I need 2 computers. So I gave her my computer. I went off to a conference call. About an hour later, I checked in with her. And I said, Jacqueline, can I just see what you're doing? And she said, sure. One screen, she was doing her paper for grad course. The other screen, she had Napster, and she was IMing with 5 friends that she graduated with in school in London when we lived overseas. And I was clueless. Napster was, quote, legal at the time. But I didn't know what Napster was. And she's showing me, well, this is easy, Dad. I want a song. That person has a phone line, too slow, DSL, no, cable's faster, I'll download from here. The 5 friends that she was IMing with, 3 of them she hadn't seen in 5 years, but they were totally up to speed. Totally up to speed. My case, if I had seen someone for 5 years, 50% of the time is spent on catching up together. And I stepped back, and I thought, my God, Margaret Regan maybe isn't crazy. She's a little bit behind. 2010 is actually happening right now. Not too long after that, a couple guys operating out of caves in Afghanistan, working with others in a virtual way, created an event that none of us ever thought could happen using some of the same kind of technology. 2004, Carly Fiorina, who was the ex-CEO of HP, herself probably a victim of some of this change that's going on, said at a speech she was giving, what's happened in the last 15 to 20 years is just a warm-up. We're now entering the main event. And she said at that time, the main event was the virtual change in how our institutions, public, private, educational, whatever, are going to operate in the future. I'm sure a lot of people then said, she's probably, stretching this a bit. Think about where we are today. Think about Apple with the iPhone. I don't know how many applications I can get, tens of thousands of applications. None of those people work. As Margaret Regan said, they don't work for Apple. They're developing these applications in all different kinds of places, for all I know, in Fiji. So there's no question in my mind that change is different today. It's accelerating at an astonishing rate. It's having a tremendous impact on our organizations. It has the potential and is creating fear, depending on where you look. Just looking in the United States right now, for the first time, Americans are saving out of fear. Maybe not the right reason, but they're saving. It's been a long time since Americans really have saved. In my own case, when I look back over the last 10 years and the people that I sat with, the CEOs that I sat with at the Business Roundtable, it's amazing how many of them disappeared. Not because they retired willfully or they moved on to another company. A couple of weeks ago, I was at a trust meeting, trustee of this foundation that supports the community. We had 55 grant requests for that particular meeting, and the night before I sat down, went through the grant request. I was amazed. 75% of the entities asking us for grant money had new leadership within the last year. 75%. It's impacting not just publicly traded companies and all the stuff we read about, it's impacting all different kinds of leaders. So, with that as a background, my feeling about what's going on, the difficulty, I think it's incredibly important that we're here, that we really focus on leadership, because at the end of the day, I'm a firm believer that all organizations need a leader. I'm not a big fan of self-managed organizations, especially in a world that is changing like it is. Before I get into the qualities, just let me talk about something that someone sent me in 2000. And for those of you who have ever gotten involved with the Toyota tools or Six Sigma or things like that, where you use them in manufacturing, but you can use them in all different kinds of applications. They often tell you that visuals are important. That when you train people, you change your process, but visuals are important in there, because people, when they get in the heat of the battle, the work, they're moving things along. It's always good to have a sign about safety, lines on the floor, all things like that. So this is a bit of a visual that I found useful for myself, and a lot of people that I've talked to in the past find useful. Professor in a business school class, efficiency, time management, said, okay, here's a quiz. Brought out a glass jar, a gallon glass jar, a dozen of rocks, fist size, started putting the rocks in the jar, came up to the top, asked the question, just a jar full. Eager beaver, jar is full. Reached over, brought out some gravel, started pouring gravel in the jar. Shake the jar, gravel going down. Asked the question, catching on? No. Reached over, sand, poured the sand in. Then reached over, finally poured water in right up to the top. Then said, what's the moral to the story? Again, hands go up. The first one said, no matter how busy your schedule is, there's always room to put more on it. He said, wrong, wrong, wrong. If you don't put the big rocks in first, they're never going in. And I ask you to think about that as I talk about leadership. Because at the end of the day, after 35 years working in a company and seeing all different kinds of leadership, good and bad, 12 years of being a director in publicly traded companies and not-for-profit institutions, I've come to the conclusion that leaders, there's a lot of leaders who are smart, articulate, can communicate, hardworking. But there's a lot of leaders who do not know how to prioritize and set priorities for themselves, who get involved with the gravel and the sand And don't focus on the fact they got to get the rocks into the jar. Now, let me just talk about some of the rocks I think are important in terms of setting priorities. Some of these rocks were thrown out of the jar by a lot of different entities. 2,000 years ago, last week, companies that are failing. The first set are really what I call the personal rocks. First one is integrity, veritas, truth. It's amazing to me to watch, to see the pressure on people, good people, the pressure on them to deal with the truth sometimes. 2 weeks ago, I had a Monsignor from a parish in our area who knows me well call me up, and they had an issue in the parish working with the parish council. He wanted to tell the parishioners, here it is, here's the issue. They said, no. He said, what would you do? I said, tell the truth. He said, I knew you'd say that, thank you, and that was the end of the phone call. So it's not just truth up there in Wall Street, the CEOs and the organizations out there. Everybody, because of what's going on, there's so many things going on at once, there's a tendency for people to sometimes even think about throwing that veritas rock on the side. Another one that's the personal one is the humble rock. Now, I could tell you, a lot of those CEOs that disappeared at the Business Roundtable, they never heard or they didn't listen to the whole concept, from ashes you came, back to ashes you will go. Humble was just not part of what they were all about, and I think time and time again, and I won't name them, but I can name a lot of people where that got in their way. They literally thought that they were bigger than everything out there. And you can't do that. That rock has to stay in the jar. Another one is the family rock. And it's the age-old thing. I'm a big believer. If you can't take care of yourself, it's unlikely you can take care of others. And as I watched a lot of executives, if they really don't care for their family, they don't take time out of their busy schedules to really care, it's highly unlikely that they're going to care for employees. Caritas. Today's world, where fear is, people are worried about what's going on, leaders have to care. And I think it's a rock that has to be in the jar. Another rock, and again, it just amazes me because it's an obvious one. Leaders need to focus on the people. It's a multifaceted rock. The first part of it is leaders have to be out there. And it's kind of simple, but yet missed many times. In my own case, one time we took the executive committee, the top 6, over to our Spanish company, one of the highest performing entities in the company over a 10-year period. We flew overnight, landed, cleaned up, went in. One of my direct reports had scheduled a whole bunch of meetings, and I have to admit, I'm not big on meetings, especially meetings with slides. I already knew they were high performing, and I said, well, look, you know what? You go do that. I'm going to go out and thank the people. I'm going to go out and shake hands. 6 floors plus the basement, 500 people. Went up to the 6th floor and started working my way through the ranks. Shook everyone's hand, asked them a little bit about themselves, thanked them. That night, going home, I always had the same driver for security reasons. Juan Antonio gets in the car, and he's shaking his head, and he's smiling. He says, you just don't know what you've done. He says, this is the greatest day that's occurred in this company in many, many years. And he said, people aren't going to wash their hands for days. And he said, they're going to kill themselves to make this an even better company because they know you care. All I did is walk around and shake hands. And I can't tell you the number of times I've watched leaders say, no, it's more important. I got to go into this meeting. Can't do that. Part of the People Rock is, if you read Collins' Good to Great, the book, get the right people on the bus, in the right seats, before you do anything. Big believer in that, you know? You can have a great plan, but if you have the wrong people, you ain't going anywhere fast. Equally important is get the wrong people off the bus. And this doesn't go against caritas or caring. It's being fair to the people in the organization. They deserve to have the right people on the bus. It's fair to the people who are going off the bus, but you need to focus on it. And again, time and time again, I've talked to a lot of executives. If you ask them, what's your greatest regret? I didn't move fast enough in making people decisions. And I don't care who they are. And I've known some tough guys. Larry Bossidy from Allied Signal, if you've ever read, he's no shrinking violet. He'll tell you that. He didn't move fast enough on certain people. Another part of that People Rock is the development rock. Taking time as a leader to focus on the fact that your obligation is to develop the future leaders, develop your successors. Again, amazing to see how many people, how many leaders out there don't do that. And as a result, organizations many times have to go to the outside, bring outside people in. And sometimes it's good. I'm not saying always, but many times people come in, don't understand the culture, don't understand, the direction, some of the history, and inflict incredible pain on the organization. And the history books would say that most outsiders don't succeed. So, good leaders of the future, to help their people feel like they have a chance of surviving, they have to develop successors. Absolutely important. Another rock that needs to go in is strategy. And General Schwarzkopf had an interesting comment. He led Desert Storm back in the early 90s. He said, leadership's all about strategy and character. And, I agree. Character is, those personal rocks, integrity, humble, things like that. And he said, if you have to give up one of them, give up strategy. And if I had to make that choice, I would. I would give up strategy and say character, is more important in terms of being a leader. But if you believe my analogy, I think you have to not play around with the sand and the gravel and the water to make sure you don't give up strategy. Because in a world that's changing rapidly, you better have a plan A. You better have a plan B. And maybe be even talking about plan C, scenario planning, because it's too hard to predict. And there are other people on the playing field that just have the ability to do things to you and your organization that if you don't plan, you're going to really hurt that organization. Another one that I think has caused a lot of organizations to go under, and I've watched a lot of leaders, do this, they ignore reality. Call it the reality rock. It has to be in there. If you have a leader, they could be bright, smart, articulate, you name it, but if they don't deal with reality well, they're not going to be a good or great leader. No question in my mind. I've seen it time and time again. And in today's world, sometimes reality is really not really very, very good. But you have to deal with it. You have to be honest. You have to really, because your job at the end of the day is to create hope for your people. Good leaders always have those rocks in there. I would say think about people that have failed. You can usually tie them to throwing one or two of those out. But they also then have some other, typically one or two other rocks that they would have in their jar. Father Peter, the strategic plan for the university leading to a campus master plan, things like that. It's his personal thing. He's doing it. He's leading people on it. Service, community service. He's brought a very different perspective to the table on that. Good leaders usually do that, one or two of those additional items. Then I would argue you don't have a lot of other time left. If you believe with all the different things I just told you you needed to get involved with, people development, planning, you don't have much time. But again, it's amazing to see how many leaders just don't get it, and they play around with the gravel, they play around with the sand, and they play around with the water. So I'm excited. My attitude is, I don't want to go hide in a hole. I think that this change is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to develop leaders who can help people in our organizations not fear change, thrive on change. It's an opportunity for Villanova. Again, the Augustinian principles of Veritas, Unitas, Caritas, in my mind, intertwine so much with what a good leader is all about. It's an opportunity to take advantage of that and differentiate ourselves. I'm excited about the opportunity that we were here today, and I want to thank the Alumni Association and the university, because I think it's an opportunity for us to help the university in formulating going forward, but it's also an opportunity for us all to maybe learn something, take it back home to the organizations we get involved with, whether they're the schools, the churches, or our own companies. Thank you.